Hey, what's going on everybody? Commander Crane here, and we are back with another Pioneer video, and today we're going to be talking about the best Pioneer cards in Murders at Karlov Manor. So, a couple things before we hop into it here. So, it's really not even like I guess it's kind of like a top 10. I mostly just went through the entire set, and I kind of picked cards that I think that are very playable in Pioneer that could be featured, whether or not, it's just like a helpful sideboard card or kind of opens up an entire new strategy or improves on one. It's kind of just a mix of how much I think the card will impact the format as a whole. And I was able to pick out 15 cards that I think are going to be at least somewhat impactful in the entire format. So also at the end of the video, let me know in the comment section below if there's a card that I definitely should have included that I did not, as well as if you want to let me know what your favorite card is in the entire set, including the commander decks and stuff, just let me know. But once again, this is going to be for Pioneer specifically, so whereas there might be a card that's going to go really, really good in your random Simic commander deck, it's not Commander, it's Pioneer specifically. So let's go ahead and hop into it here. So, all right, number 15, I have Pick Your Poison. I think this is just going to be a really good green sideboard card. One green sorcery, choose one. Each opponent sacrifices an artifact, each opponent sacrifices an enchantment, or each opponent sacrifices a creature with flying. So naturalize effects have been getting very powerful in the last couple sets. So, we've came from like naturalize, and then we went to I'm already forgetting the name of it, Return to Nature, and then we kind of got like Run Afoul randomly in one of the core sets, and then now all of a sudden we have like Plummets being mixed with Naturalizes like Atraxas Fall, and then now we have Pick Your Poison, which is kind of like Run Afoul meet Atraxas Fall in a way. It's each opponent sacrifices, so they get to pick whatever one they want, so it can potentially be worse than Atraxas Fall, but still, it has a lot of upside for sure. So I think Pick Your Poison is going to be a very, very solid sideboard card in Pioneer going forward. So, number 14, I have Galvanize, a card that I don't think a lot of people are really talking about. 1 in a red instant, Galvanize deals 3 damage to target creature. If you've drawn 2 or more cards this turn, Galvanize deals 5 damage to that creature instead. So, I think this is best in a weird, kind of like, is it Phoenix, for instance, I think could play a card like this. So, if you cast it on your turn, so it's if you've drawn 2 or more cards this turn. So if you did your regular draw step and then you just play an opt or whatever, then you can go ahead and Galvanize right away, which is pretty sweet. That's just kind of an example. 2 mana, 5 damage is very efficient. So we'll kind of see what happens. Who knows? I could just be completely missing the mark here, and I think, and maybe the card just really doesn't see any play, but I think this card is very, very solid, and we'll kind of see what happens going forward. So, number 13, I have Drag the Canal, a card that it just has a lot of upside. I don't know what kind of deck would want this, but it's just, it blue and a black instant, create a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. If a creature died this turn, you gain 2 life, surveil 2, then investigate. That is just an extremely efficient card. You can get a 2/2 body, 2 life, surveil 2, and investigate. Wow, that is extremely strong for 2 mana. Again, I'm not 100% sure what kind of deck would want to play this. Maybe like a 3 color, like mid-range or control pile, possibly. It feels pretty good if you have like 3 mana and you go Fatal Push their creature, and then you go boom, Drag the Canal, you get all this value. That could be pretty solid. But we'll kind of see what happens, but I think this card just has a ton of upside as a whole. So, next one, number 12, I have Undergrowth Recon, 1 green enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So there's really a number of different things I think this card could do. I think the main thing that most people jump to is, oh my gosh, Field of Ruin. And I think so. I think you're very correct in thinking that. When I first saw this card, it kind of reminded me of like a green-white hate bear kind of deck where you could play like Rabbing Up Excavator or something like that, and you could just keep returning all your lands into play and do some really silly shenanigans, that kind of thing. It does enter tapped, so it's not like you can do like anything super duper crazy with this thing, unless you have like Spelunking, for instance. And I think that was part of the design space with this, is you can kind of use it with caves. But again, I think Undergrowth Recon is very interesting, and we'll kind of see what happens going forward. So, next card I have, number 11, Delny? Yes, Delny, Streetwise Lookout. 2/2 for 2 and a white, legendary human scout. Creatures you control with power 2 or less can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. If an ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. So, alright, it's a human. It can definitely do some very strong things. You know, a lot of humans have really solid ETBs that are around 1 or 2 mana, or have power 2 or less, which kind of goes hand in hand for the most part. It's really interesting, especially with like a card like, for instance, like Thalia's Lieutenant, technically triggers twice, which is pretty sweet. But we'll see what happens with Delany. I think this card has a lot of upside. I wouldn't be surprised if it was like one of those cards where it just ends up getting played as like a one of and a bunch of random white decks, that kind of thing. This card has a lot of upside, and we'll kind of see what happens. I mean, it is a 2/2 for 3, but it's one of those cards where if you untap with it, you're just going to get so much value that you're pretty much just going to end up winning the game. But we'll kind of see what happens with Delany for the most part. So, all right, number 10, I have Vein Ripper. So this could be a little bit of a surprise to some people. So 3 black, 6/5 with flying vampire assassin with ward, sacrifice a creature. Whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So, okay, whatever. It's like a giant blood artist, that kind of thing. But this is where it's important. You're not really going to be hard casting this thing. It's with Sorin Imperious Bloodlord. Its minus ability can put a vampire from your hand right onto the battlefield, and this is essentially the biggest vampire you could put into play, not including Galta and Maverin. I think in the Galta, Maverin, Abzan deck, I think this card is going to be huge. I think it's probably just better than Champion of Dusk for the most part in that deck, especially because it's a 6/5 flyer with ward, sacrifice a creature. So if your opponent just doesn't have a creature in play or anything like that, it's just hexproof, which is pretty sweet. So I think Vein Ripper is going to be very, very good in that deck specifically. We'll see what happens. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if it's featured in like some spicy one-ofs or anything like that, or like maybe some mid-range decks want like a big flyer and they start playing it, but we'll kind of see what happens with Vein Ripper. So we're kind of in the top 10 now, so we're going to really see some spicy cards here. So number 9 is Gleaming Geardrake, a card I feel like that's going very under the radar because it was shown off in the initial spoilers, so people have kind of forgotten about it. 1/1 for blue and a red artifact creature Drake with flying. When it enters the battlefield, investigate. Whenever you sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on Gleaming Geardrake. So obviously the idea is you investigate with all of your clues and then you sacrifice them to put counters on Gleaming Geardrake. But here's the thing, we can do unfair things with Gleaming Geardrake. If we have any free artifact sacrifice outlets, we can just go ahead and sacrifice the artifacts immediately to get counters on this, which is pretty sweet. So something to keep in mind. You know, I don't think there's anything too crazy you can do with, for the most part, as of right now with a card like Gleaming Geardrake, at least in Pioneer. There are some free sacrifice outlets for this, but most of them are in black, so, you know, you'd have to go 3 color to really make something happen for the most part. But going forward, let's keep an eye out on some artifact sacrifice. There are some different red sacrifice ones. I know there's basically like an ATOG for the most part that's currently in the Pioneer format, but we'll see what happens. I think this card has a lot of potential to really take off in the format. And what's also pretty cool, it's an artifact itself, so if you have 2 of them or whatever, and you know, removal spell, whatever, sacrifice the one, which triggers the other one, which is pretty sweet. So, but anyways, all right, so number 8, I have Commercial District, but it's really just the entire dual land cycle. I decided to feature just this one because I like the art and I like Gruul cards, obviously. So when it enters the battlefield, it does come into play tapped, but it does have the Mountain Forest typing, and then when it enters the battlefield, Surveil 1. So kind of an upgrade from the original Temple lands from Theros. Obviously having the typing is very huge, just because, you know, for instance, if an opponent besieges you, it's basic land type, so you can go ahead and put this into play, which is pretty huge. I think one thing I'm really happy about with this is it technically improves the check lands. The check lands were once like huge staples of the Pioneer format, and they're kind of falling out of the wayside just because of all the fantastic utility lands that are in the format. But I think this potentially can help the check lands come back a little bit, because then you got the Surveil lands here, then you have the shock lands, which can come into play, and then you obviously have the check lands, which is pretty sweet. So we'll kind of see what happens. I think this is going to be a really good mid-range and control deck land. If you're pretty much playing the temples, swap them out for this. That is at least a really easy swap, that kind of thing. So we'll kind of see what happens with these, but I do expect them to see play in the Pioneer format. So number 7, I have Demand Answers. Again, another card I feel like people are forgetting about just because it was in the initial spoiler. 1 and red instant. As an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice an artifact or discard a card and draw 2 cards. So I know a lot of people like look at, oh, it's really just a slightly better torment, or not tormenting voice. What's the instant speed one now? Thrill possibility, you know, because you discard and draw two. But you can also sacrifice an artifact, which is real. That's just really good value. It kind of reminds me of Deadly Dispute for the most part, although not technically quite as good as Deadly Dispute. It's essentially a red one, which is very sweet. Obviously works really well with Gleaming Drake, just because you sacrifice an artifact, like an extra clue you have, boom, trigger the Drake, that kind of thing. I think this will see play at least somewhat. Again, if you're already playing Deadly Dispute, you're obviously gonna not play that, but at least if you're playing like a blue-red deck, or really anything without black, you would probably want Demand Answer. So we'll see what happens. You know, I think this card definitely is strong, and we'll kind of see what happens with it in the overall metagame. So, number 6, I have Ill-Timed Explosion, 2 blue-red sorcery. Draw 2 cards, then you may discard 2 cards. When you do, Ill-Timed Explosion deals X damage to each creature, where X is the greatest mana value among cards discarded this way. It's just a really good blue-red potential board wipe, which is pretty sweet. The nice thing is then you may discard 2 cards, so you could technically just use this as a 4-mana draw too, you know, depending on the situation. You know, like obviously if there's not any creatures on the board, or you don't want any of your creatures to die, you could just 4-mana draw too. But obviously being able to do X damage to each creature, X is the greatest mana value among cards discarded this way. You can do some pretty silly things, like for instance, if you discard, for instance, like a Treasure Cruise, boom, just wreck the entire board really easily, that kind of thing. So it's really just a 4-mana Wrath in Izzet, which they don't really have access to that for the most part. I mean, obviously there's like the 3-mana red ones, that kind of thing, but Izzet having a board wipe in the format is pretty sweet. So I'm definitely a big fan of Ill-Timed Explosion. All right, so next, top 5 here, so there's going to be some really good spice coming in here. So number 5, I have Lightning Helix. Again, another card that was shown off initially at Murders of Karlov Manor spoilers. Card's really good. Boros, instant, deals 3 damage to any target, and you gain 3 life. We'll kind of see if some of the traditional mono red decks start to go into Boros, because not only do you get Lightning Helix, but you also get Boros Charm. So, you know, Boros Charm itself was kind of like, yeah, it's maybe kind of worth it, you know, but then you got to tinker with the whole mana base just to maybe make a little bit of white mana. But now that you have Boros Charm and Lightning Helix, it makes it, you know, you're very incentivized to just play Boros as opposed to just mono red. So we'll see what happens, but I highly suggest switching to maybe, you know, Boros, or at least splashing some white for a card like Lightning Helix. So number 4, I have Leyline of the Guild Pact. So this is just a really weird card. Obviously, it's got all that hybrid mana there, enchantment. If Leyline of the Guild Pact is in your opening hand, you may begin the game with it on the battlefield. Each non-land permanent you control is all colors, and lands you control are every basic land type in addition to their other types. So 2 things about this is there is green in every single one of those pips. So, and you could just play this in mono green, for instance, and we all saw what happened the last time there was a green Leyline that was featured in Pioneer. It's banned, although, you know, functionally it's a different card, but essentially just getting free, well, 4 free green pips is kind of ridiculous. The other thing I wanted to mention with this is it automatically turns on, my gosh, I'm forgetting the name of it, Leyline Binding, which obviously, you know, you got the name in there, which kind of is kind of like a cool callback a little bit. But anyways, being able to have a turn 1 Leyline just automatically is kind of ridiculous, if we're honest. Again, I'm not saying it's necessarily worth it to play it in a deck like that, but boom, it enters play, it enters turn 0, then you have all your colors immediately, your Leyline Binding is on, all of a sudden you can just play whatever spells you want. We'll kind of see what happens with this card, but I do think it's pretty solid. For the main reason, I think you just play it in mono green. I think you just try to get those green pips for the most part, so that's personally why I have it on my number 4 strongest cards. So, number 3, I have Archdruids. I was going to say Archdruids, but Archdruids Charm. Again, I think this is also going to be really good in the mono green deck. So green, instant, choose 1. Search your library for a creature or land card and reveal it. Put it onto the battlefield tapped if it's a land card. Otherwise, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Again, it says land card, not basic land. That means you can grab some spicy 1-ups. So obviously we're playing green, so you could grab a Nykthos, you could grab a Castle Granbury, you could grab a Sunken Citadel, you could grab a whatever. If you're just playing like one random spicy land, you can just go ahead and grab that. Or we can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So it's a rabid bite. It's not a fight, it's a rabid bite, which is pretty sweet. Again, puts a 1/1 counter on it, which is pretty sweet. Or exile target artifact or enchantment. So most of the time, you're going to be doing the first mode. You're not really going to be doing the other modes very often. But hey, it can happen. You know, you exile a Fires of Invention or random juicy artifact that's really good. I don't know. I can't think of one right now. Witch's Oven. We can exile their Witch's Oven. I don't know. But I think this card is really, really good. And again, I think mono green devotion decks are going to play a couple of these. The card is very, very strong. Okay. So number 2, I have Novice Inspector. It's a common, but it's very strong. 1/2 for 1 when it enters the battlefield. Investigate. Same as Thraben Inspector, but guess what? The Boros Convoke decks play Thraben Inspector and Voldaren Epicure because they want to make a creature and have a turn 1 artifact, so that way they can do the Furnace Celebration, or I'm forgetting the name of that card all of a sudden, but it makes the 3/1/1 goblins for 1 red. Essentially, you just destroy your own artifact that you create, and guess what? They have another copy of that. I think it's going to be good in a number of different decks. The Boros Convoke deck is definitely what's going to take advantage of this card the most, but if there's some really spicy human decks that play some artifact synergy, this card's gonna be a huge part of that. The card is just very, very good. It's Thraben Inspector. You just get another copy of it, but having 8 copies is the most important thing. So that's why Novice Inspector is number 2 on my list and the number 1 card. It definitely hurts me to put it here, but I do think it's the card that is the strongest in the set in terms of Pioneer playability. And that card is, drumroll, No More Lies. This card is extremely good. And so a little bit of backstory. I have been advocating for Mana Leak for a long time in the Pioneer format. And here's the thing. I don't really play blue decks. I don't even want to play against Mana Leak to a certain extent, but I've always thought that counterspells have been generally pretty weak in the format as a whole. There's some really linear ones that are solid, but No More Lies is very, very good. White and a blue instant, counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. So it's basically like a Mana Leak and a Syncopate mixed into one. It's very strong. I think basically if you're playing blue-white in Pioneer, I think you're going to play No More Lies. Whether or not you're just blue-white, maybe even like a Spirits deck, or you're playing Jeskai Control or Jeskai mid-range, if you're playing just anything with blue and white, you're going to be playing No More Lies, either in the main board or the sideboard. The card's very, very strong. Again, it's Mana Leak with a Syncopate. Strong card. This card is going to be huge in Pioneer, and I'm very excited to see how it kind of develops in the format. Again, counterspells, most decks are just playing Make Disappear because it's kind of the best one by default, but if you're playing blue-white, this card is absolutely incredible. And I also want to mention the blue, the dual color cards at uncommon that they printed in the set are all very strong. We also saw Lightning Helix is very, very good as well. There was also like the Crawl Assassin or whatever. That one was really good. Just honestly, all of the uncommon dual color cards were really, really good that they printed in the set. So you should definitely check those out if you haven't already. So, well, that takes us to the end of the video. Let me know in the comment section below, what do you think about the list? Is there cards that I definitely put in the wrong order? What is your favorite card featured in Murders at Karlov Manor? Just let me know in the comment section below. So, I'm Commander Crane. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.